Okay, welcome everyone to the Analytic Mind podcast. We are recording this in January of 2021, so one of our newer pieces of content for the year, which is exciting. And I'm speaking today with Matt Brown. I think that's right. Yeah, Matt Brown from JLL. So JLL is, I'm sure Matt, you can expand on this a little bit more, but JLL is a large sort of real estate conglomerate working across a range of different aspects of the real estate industry. And you've evolved over time into an analytics role there, and you're running a team. So I think there's plenty of great things that we can talk about. One of them being, analytics in the real estate industry, which I think is quite unique in itself. But also just generally about how you're organizing the team, how you're prioritizing certain initiatives that you're running. So yeah, why don't you take over from here? Give a much better background to your experience and also to what you're doing now.
Yeah, well, pleasure to be here, Sam. So I've been at JLL for about 6 years, and as you said, it's an international commercial real estate services company. So we advise clients on everything to do with real estate, the operations and maintenance of their buildings, the acquisition or selling of their properties, capital improvements, project management, tenant placement, you name it. Anything that has to do with commercial real estate, we help do that. And I work in the business intelligence group for one of our large banking clients. I have a team of 7 folks. International again, we've got resources all over the world that collaborate on our projects. Before jumping from or to business intelligence, I was in the energy and sustainability services space. And again, a lot of data analysis routines there. A lot of our clients are really focused on making their real estate footprint more sustainable. And that, that's kind of how I've dovetailed my personal interest and my professional interest. I've always tried to help make buildings more environmentally friendly, reduce their impact on the natural environment. And I've found that in order to increase my impact in that space, data analysis and business intelligence has been a way to touch more buildings and influence those behaviors in those buildings. So that's kind of where my interests are and how I kind of got to where I am now.
That's great. I'd love to just dive into that for a second, actually. So because I mean, that's quite a nuanced part of an industry, right? It's like the sustainability of buildings, right? And so it's amazing the far reaches of analysis and the impact that it can have. So what have you, from your experience, have you done in that space, or like, can you expand on some of the interesting things that you've done around that quite niche topic?
Yeah. So for many of our clients, they have large footprints of buildings. So they'll have, say, thousands of buildings across many countries. And the resources they've dedicated to make them more energy efficient might be very limited. Maybe 1 or 2 professionals, like known as energy managers or energy analysts. And so one project we did for a client was a global benchmarking project. And so we took the energy consumption of all of their buildings and we created internal benchmarks. So we were able to say, a building in this climate zone, whether it be the Philippines or some part of America, if it had a similar climate zone, we would group the energy consumption, divide it by the square footage, and we're able to create energy per square foot benchmarks for each property type. And then that way we could flag which buildings were consuming energy above that benchmark. So if you run that analysis across a portfolio of 2,000, 3,000 buildings, you could say to the energy management team, here's the dozen or so that are far outliers from their expected performance, and these are the ones you should be focusing on. So it really helps them find the needles in the haystack.
That's really fascinating. Now, one of the challenges that I see with that sort of project is actually getting the data. So how did you go about that part of it?
So that was actually my job on one account. So I actually had to set up contracts with the utility bill vendors, which were responsible for collecting utility data. And I was also governing the database that handled all those inflows of data. So that was I was uniquely positioned to manage that problem. And globally, it was a problem. We were only getting, say, every other bill in certain countries. But as many people in analytics find, you build a dashboard, start measuring its performance, and track the improvement. So we built a dashboard that was tracking data completeness for utility bill information. And so we ran that program for about a year and a half, 2 years, before we started getting acceptable numbers, like 90, 95% data completeness. And that gave us confidence to then be able to take our analysis to the next step, which was, the fun bit, the part where we can actually do benchmarking and all the information gather, the insight gathering.
Yeah, I really find this actually quite fascinating because I've touched on this on many discussions I've had on the podcast, is that the opportunities are so significant, right? Like around, we're just talking about one really specific example in a very niche part of the real estate industry, right? And there's opportunities like this just basically everywhere you look within any organization. But a lot of it actually comes down to actually getting the data, like actually, getting the raw material somehow. Sometimes it just doesn't exist. It's not there to be able to initially, at stage one, to be able to produce the great insight, like the benchmarking that you've done in that particular example. And so it would be interesting to just understand a little bit more about what you went through from maybe like a strategy point of view, but also like building up your technology stack to actually get that data, manage it, and curate it over time.
Yeah, so we had to do a request for proposal for our utility bill vendor. There were, at the time, this was several years, 4 or 5 years ago, there was very few vendors that would be willing to, or even qualified to pick up a global utility bill contract. So we had a pretty short list of vendors we were working with. So once we got them on board, we needed to make sure they could get the data out of their system and into our systems. So we had to explore different APIs or export routines. We were lucky that our technology stack was evolving as this project was. So we ended up getting access to Alteryx, which was one of the tools we used to take the data, export from their system, reshape it, and then bring it into our data warehouse, which is just a MySQL server. We weren't dealing with massive volumes of data, so it was a matter of just getting the data in a clean format, a flat file that was acceptable, reshaping it, and then getting it into our data warehouse. We can then do the visualizations in Tableau or further reshaping in Alteryx.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's almost like you've created a data asset within that project, right? Like you right from the start, you can conceptually think about these things, but it's not always as easy as just like plugging into a database. You need to actually sometimes create the asset. You need to somehow go and mine the data. You're going to need to go and mine the commodity and actually create the end product from that, like the end asset from that. And I think it sounds like a perfect example of you doing exactly that.
Yeah, and I was in the ESS role at the time, so I was fully positioned to build that asset. Once we had that asset, like that was a prerequisite for all the other stuff, and that facilitated my jump to business intelligence, because then I wanted to manage a team that was taking the data and doing interesting things with it. I mentioned the benchmarking project. We also were able to help the client automate their environmental reporting. Many Fortune 500 companies report their carbon emissions externally. And most of the carbon emissions from a company is its commercial real estate footprint, the energy consumed by the buildings. And so now that we've built this database, they could actually leverage that to get their carbon numbers reported externally and displace the existing process, which was coordinating, manual data entry across, 40 plus countries. And so it was a big time saver, but also increased the quality of the data that ultimately was exported externally.
It's really interesting because I always wondered how these companies come out with these numbers around their emissions. It's kind of like it sounds like the most arbitrary thing that you could ever imagine. And so you're confirming that there is some calculations being done in the background here.
Absolutely, arbitrary is being kind, I would say.
So do you think that that they created a problem that you've had to solve, where you've actually had to give them some realistic numbers to actually present?
Yeah, well, that was what bothered me about some of this sector is the data that we're making decisions on is woefully inadequate. And so, to your original point in this conversation, the problem one is getting the data, and then you can make good decisions on it. If you're just making up data or filling in the blanks, it's not quite as valuable as the real thing.
And so, what are some other interesting things that you've been doing in this area, in the analytics space? I'm loving just diving into really unique ideas, and I think that's going to give others the inspiration around what they could do in maybe the area that they're working in.
Yeah, so there's a lot of data sets within commercial real estate that have a lot of hidden value. Work orders, for example. So every time someone in a building says, "Hey, it's too cold, it's too hot," there's an odor in the bathroom, this light bulb's out, they issue a work order, and so those are like the red blood cells in facilities management. They're just constantly flowing around the system. We manage millions of tickets a year, and from an operational point of view, it's just making sure people's complaints are addressed or the work is scheduled and get done. But over the course of a year, you have a pile of data that you can mine for insights. Are the right people in our employee staffing doing the right types of jobs? Like, do we have a skilled engineer doing work that a cleaning vendor should be handling? And so we've built a project where we actually looked at how our work orders are being dispatched. And we found that in some cases, our work orders were being sent to third-party vendors before they were sent to our internal engineers for action. And that has a financial impact because our engineers can actually get the job done if they have the time and the expertise. Our internal engineers can get the job done much more effectively and affordably than if it went to third party. And so that tool was able to help us identify which changes we can make to our system and maximize the work our engineers was doing and minimize the work done by third-party consultants.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds like another example of taking almost like a dormant data asset that you would just never think would be able to produce value, but generating quantifiable value from the insights generated from that raw material.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the tricks is you got to make sure that the data is trustworthy. So we do have to, do a couple sniff tests and make sure the data is complete. There aren't a bunch of false records in there. So for any of these projects, whether it's energy or work order data, we do have to do a first scan, get rid of some of the false positives and bad data to help tell the true story.
One of the other interesting things that really sort of just comes to mind when discussing, especially the international aspect of your of your business and what you're having to deal with, is that I presume the cloud has had a huge impact in what you can actually do, because it would have been very, very difficult to retrieve all of this data and manage it as easily as you can do it now with everything more based in the cloud than what you could have done, say, 7 to 10 years ago.
Yeah, well, so for many of our clients, they are risk adverse in terms of putting data into the cloud.
Right.
And so we've built dedicated servers like on premises
Oh, okay.
that store our data, but they're accessible as long as the right people on our teams have access. And we set user permissions and user groups and security groups. As long as
Right.
they have access, they can get to the data they need to.
Right.
We would love to be doing more cloud stuff,
Okay.
but
So it's not. So I'm not exactly. I'm not sort of as on point as I thought I was. Like it doesn't actually matter as much. Well, in your case, anyway.
it can help a lot of. So some clients, especially some of the newer companies, the newer tech companies that we support, they are much more. I mean, their business is built in the cloud, so
Yeah.
um, not they don't discourage use of it. They actually directly encourage the use of it. So
Mm-hmm.
we have to have multiple technology solutions to cater to any flavor of client. The ones that are
Mm-hmm.
the most conservative, all the way up to the ones that are the most cloud friendly.
Right. What I'd like to get a bit more insight on, because especially with you being in sort of a leadership role, I think you're overseeing a lot of aspects of a data pipeline, right? And what I'm quite like, we have a lot. We've had a lot of discussions sort of about the visualization aspects of things, but I want to get your insights into more sort of like the pipeline aspect. Like, what is some of the key technologies, but also just processes that you can put in place to connect the data in its rawest form, or at least get data in its rawest form into a database that can then be connected up to a visualization tool. Like, what are some of the connecting tissue that you need to make that process as seamless as it can be?
Well, so in many cases, we're working with a third-party tool. That's
Mm-hmm.
either the front-end data entry or the repository of the raw data. Um, so we got to make sure that's been governed properly. Right, the people are trained how to use the tool. We've got good, accurate inputs going into it. Um, from there, we have to establish data feeds out of that system of record into our data warehouse. And so that's mostly handled not by my team or even by my group. It's handled by an internal engineering team that manages and maintains all the data connections.
Mm-hmm.
And we refresh that data once a day. So before we have our reports consume that, it's good to have a data quality check. After refresh, make sure, some of the basic checks, like, is the table populated, right? Is it returning any values, right? Because sometimes if there's a failure, you'll get nothing back. So putting in some data checks for content, completeness, and then if it passes through those, then you have it go through to your data visualization or your analytic routines.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have your refreshes there. So it takes quite a journey from system of record to a dashboard that's consumable by a bigger audience. And you need to have eyes at every stage, because these are processes that can fail. And you need to make sure that you're catching that before you get a phone call from your end user. Why is my dashboard blank?
Right, right. And are you finding that if are you trying to get your data into, say, like a SQL database? Is that kind of like the target location for the data, and then you're just trying to get it in an optimized shape for that piece of infrastructure?
Yes, yeah. Our internal engineering teams will create base tables in our SQL database that would be the starting point for any client.
Right.
Now, some clients have different needs, so we might have to take that and reshape that further, or blend in another data set to
Interesting.
bring in fields or content that might not have been part of the base data table. So you think about your engineering team is giving us let's say all white Lego blocks, but we need yellow and red, and so we might have to bring those in externally. And we'll use tools like Alteryx primarily to help with that data
Cool.
connection and blending.
Right. So with Alteryx, what is the because I haven't really sort of spoken to this piece of technology too much previously. What are some of the key features or key things that it can do that some of the other technologies can't?
Well, I haven't done a ton of vetting of the other options out there.
Okay.
We use Tableau quite a bit. So Tableau Prep was always kind of one of the options out there, but Alteryx is just several versions ahead of,
Right.
of Tableau Prep, and they might even change the name. I think it was Maestro at some point. So there are lots of options out there. Our corporate IT folks, they did that vetting, and they presented Alteryx as the option for us. So,
Right.
And same with Tableau. That's our primary data visualization tool. So it's not, we don't have a ton of leeway in choosing tools other than that.
Right. So Alteryx really is sort of like an ETL tool. It's like a tool that can connect to a variety of data sources. You can transform the data into any sort of shape that you want using some of the features that they have, and then you can get an output which is optimized for your visualization tool. Is that as sort of simple terms?
Yeah,
key features?
Correct. Yeah, and you can do some other like database optimization routines, before you create that table. So like indexing, for example.
Right.
Like if your base table isn't indexed, you can run it through Alteryx and create another table that is indexed, and that can increase the speed of your queries tenfold or more.
Right. Yeah. It's very similar because Power BI, which is what my firm organization, Enterprise DNA, is sort of more focused on generally, is the query editor. We have a query editor which does a lot of that work as well, but it's sort of connected into Power BI. It's part of Power BI. So yeah, I mean, it sounds very, very similar. Maybe Alteryx has a bit of, because that is its core product, it's maybe got a little bit of additional functionality. I'm not too sure. I haven't used it too extensively myself. But it seems like they can do similar type of things.
Yeah.
What would be interesting to go into next, I think, is because you're actually doing analytics from a almost like, it sounds like a consulting basis, right? Because you're actually doing it for a customer. Like you've got a big customer that has got a partnership with your organization, and you're actually doing work for them. So I think that just, we don't have to go into like specifics about the customer, but just like high level, how do you find your interactions with key stakeholders there, or how are you going about getting engagement from key stakeholders in that sort of relationship?
Yeah, so I usually try to get involved in the early stages of the problem solving scenario. So a client will have a problem. They'll either have a KPI in our contract they want us to hit, or things unforeseeable happen like COVID, or disasters like hurricanes, and they'll explain to us what their needs are. Their needs are usually filtered through the service lines. So the engineering teams, the facilities management teams, the contracting teams, they'll usually come to the BI program and say, hey, we have this problem from the client. My general approach is I want to get as close to the person experiencing the pain as possible. So I want to get to the true stakeholder. I find when someone else's pain is communicated through another person, there's nuance that's lost, and they might not fully understand what the client is experiencing. So I want to get as close to the person experiencing the pain as possible. And I'll generally schedule a call with them, like a discovery call, and try to get what are the objectives that they're trying to solve for, what are the pain points they're trying to avoid, and it kind of goes organically from there. I'll also sometimes come into projects when the tool is already developed, and they'll be asking questions. I was just on a call today, actually, and the client was saying, we want to look at this, but without this bar here. And so on the call with the service lines, I'm navigating the Tableau visualization with them, telling them what filters to turn on and off. For many times, our client or our service line leads are engaging with Tableau for the very first time. And so they're almost afraid to ask, well, what they don't know, or like, how do I do this? So I try to join those calls, and as the question pops up, I can immediately interject and guide them in that direction.
Right.
And so I'm like, kind of help support on the line. And that really helps me see how much further our organizations have to go in terms of getting the word out, getting people data literate, getting people more comfortable with using Tableau, leaving the world of Excel and PowerPoint and fully embracing, what you can do with a live dashboard.
It's quite amazing how much further there is still to go, isn't it? Like, those of us who are in the space and can understand the value that can be created are just like, it's just incredible. But then, you've still got the 95% of the world that don't even know it yet. It's just it's just truly unbelievable.
Yeah. I've gotten more kudos for telling people how to make a filter work than, building a more complicated analytics tool.
I know. Well, it just highlights like so many conversations I have just highlight how much opportunity there is, even with simple things. Like, doesn't even have to be complex. Like, you can build the simplest things, get a really quality looking dashboard in front of the right people. Like, that's gonna make huge impact to their lives, but also to yourself. Like, you're going to be seen as a really valuable asset, even if you can just do that. What one other thing that I thought would be interesting to just talk about is also is how are you showcasing the value? So, obviously, with some of the things you've discussed is like, when I think about that, I think, well, how do you even price that as something in the project before you even do it? Because like you're almost having to dream up the entire thing, from where to get the data, all of the processes around the pipeline. Then you got to deliver the product. Like, how are you, sort of saying, okay, we can do this. It's going to cost X, and then actually showcasing that there's a good return on investment from that.
Yeah, it's so it's different for every project. Is the short answer. I usually go to my friend Excel and start modeling up what the variables are. What's current state look like? Like, how many people are doing this task? How many hours do they take doing that task? What does future state look like? Is there less people involved, less time, but the same number of people? And so I look at it from that resourcing point of view. Then I try to quantify, okay, well, what are some of the outputs? Are we reducing costs? Are we able to eliminate a vendor with this process? Are we able to renegotiate an existing contract with a vendor because we're taking some work out of their scope and we can do it cheaper? Are we ensuring hitting a KPI that has fee attached to it in our contract? Like, will this mitigate the risk of missing a KPI? So just trying to understand, build that economic model, and try to sell it, figure out what, what's going to resonate with the decision makers, and then make it look pretty in a business case, and present that to the decision maker. But you can usually find something with time saving, cost reduction, or revenue increase. Something in there is going to resonate with somebody, or risk mitigation. Sometimes clients like having visibility of a data set because it reduces risk.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of an economic model, or building an economic model around your analytics initiatives or your analytics projects. But one thing that stuck out was that there is there is so many parts that you can build into an economic model, and I presume that you've got to prioritize some things over others, right? And if you were going into a proposal around what could be done, how are you going about prioritizing which things you should focus on in your economic model versus others?
Yeah. So I identify the person who you're asking money from, right? Like that's going to be really important. And then you want to know what they care about. If they're all about cost reduction, then your economic model better highlight the cost reductions from that initiative. If they only care about top line growth, just they want to get more revenue from whatever you're trying to achieve. Your model better show where that revenue growth is coming from. So knowing your decision maker and what they care about is going to really drive what your priorities should be in that model.
Yeah, nice. I like it. Yeah, that's a nice, simple way to think about it, and to approach it. And really drilling into the specific person. The specific person that you're the specific stakeholder that you're targeting. I like it. What would be good to jump to next, Matt, would be around, you're managing a group of people, and so in the analytics space. So what are some interesting things that you are doing, maybe, but also just some insights around how to manage an analytics team effectively that you think would be valuable to those listening?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned my team is spread across 3 different countries. So diverse distribution of background, age, cultural background, and so it's. I look at that as a strength of my team. We have a lot of different experiences we can borrow from and learn from, and different time zones as well. So someone is up somewhere on my team. So I think it's really important if you're dealing with a remote team, which a lot of us are now. I've been working remote for 6 years, but a lot of people since COVID have been working remote that weren't previously experienced in there. You want to set up a cadence of touch points. So I have weekly touch points with all my team, every member of my team, and it's just you and that person. I have 7 people, and you want to just have that FaceTime with them, see how they're doing, especially working from home. There might be some stresses that they wouldn't be comfortable saying in an email, or personal things happening that they just feel more comfortable sharing with you on a one-on-one. So that's just a very simple personal thing that any manager can do, just scheduling, giving that time to your employees. I also schedule monthly quality conversations, we call them, where it's a little bit longer of a call. It happens once a month, and we don't talk about projects. We literally just talk about their career. And I have some folks on my team that are earlier in their career. They're upskilling very quickly. Their salary expectations are increasing. They're becoming very desirable now that they have real business skills, real working knowledge, and technical skills, not just a degree. So you want to make sure you're fostering their career interests, like giving them skills in a new tool, or giving them advice of how to network internally or externally to find what their next career is going to be. I never want to hold on to an employee forever. Like, I want them to be as productive as they can be and as happy as they can be. And sometimes that means leaving my team. And if that's the case, I want to help facilitate that conversation and that move, because we might come across each other 10 years from now. So and they'll be 10 years more experienced. And so I want to make sure that that relationship is maintained. So those are just two tips. I know we have lots of meetings in our days, but those are 2 things I've found that have worked quite well, managing remote teams.
I like it. We could almost push this particular episode to the human resources areas of organizations. That is some valuable stuff that a lot of managers could find useful in any organization around the world. So I like it. Now, what is, specifically on the sort of analytics side of things, how do you go about managing some of your analytics projects in your team? Like, is there some specific pieces of technology that you do? Or do you have like some round tables where you go over your, the dashboards that everyone's creating? Like, what are some of the things that you specifically do around your projects?
Yeah, so I would say we use it's quasi-agile. So we aren't doing formal agile like in the software world, where you have scrums or you have stand-up meetings and you go through everything. So it's not formalized in that like as formalized as Scrum or Kanban, different product management, software development tools, but it is greatly influenced by those. So we have 3 times a week stand-ups with my team and all of our service lines. So our primary stakeholders, 3 times a week. It's just a half an hour call. And we run through our master list of projects, which is about 60. There's about 60 active projects. Now, on any given call, we only have 30 minutes. So we're not going through all 60. What we are doing is we're going through the ones that need attention or have been prioritized for that meeting by the stakeholders. And so I find having 3 touch points a week, emergencies are always popping up. Clients always need something last minute. I can have a stable of projects that my team are working on, but if something pops up and we need to shift resources, we can respond very quickly. And I find that helps me address client need and stakeholder needs while still keeping our projects that are going to have a 3-month development timeline, those still stay the course.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't use a tool. I mean, I've used other tools before, like Trello or Jira in the past, which are helpful. But I hate to admit it, but we just pull up an Excel spreadsheet and we track our project that way. It's just easy. Everyone can see it, and we have for lack of a better word, a scribe, like someone that's responsible for taking the notes and updating the project data on the call. So my team can focus on what they need to say to their projects. Service lines can focus on what they need, and the note taker is documenting the system of record, and it's distributed to all parties after the call, so everyone can reference that if needed offline.
I like it. It's amazing that you're dealing with 60 different projects at once. How do you how are you utilizing your resources across those different, like, how are you deciding how to allocate resources across those different projects?
Yeah, so we have every 6 months we have it used to be in person. We would have an offsite, but now they're virtual. But every 6 months I would meet with the service lines, and we basically talk about their goals for the year, have their goals changed. So the first one in the year is, what are your goals for the year? The middle one is, have your goals changed? And then we populate the project list with all the projects that they need BI support for to achieve those goals.
Mm-hmm.
And so that happens twice every year, February and then end of summer. And that creates the list of projects that we're going to work on. The end of that meeting, one of the key actions is, I need them to prioritize in numeric order what projects they would like us to work on. So I work with 6 different service lines. So each service line gets a number 1 priority. And so, that's the one that will have a person assigned to it and will be working on it. But they can go down the list of projects and give a number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, as many projects as they have. I then take all the number 1s. So I have 6 service lines. I'm going to have 6 number 1s, and I will give one of those 1s to each of my team members.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then I give a number 2 to each of my team members, and 3 and 4 and so forth. So every one of my team members will have a number 1 priority, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth, until all the projects are assigned. And then it's clear, the service lines know what their priorities are, and my team knows that they're aligned to those priorities. But, and this happens often, if your number 1 priority has a blocker, you're waiting for a response from a client, you're waiting for a data set to be ready, you're waiting for someone to validate your report, If there's a blocker on your number one, you move to your number two, and so forth. So my team has all these, they have a big backlog of work. They always know what they should be focusing on, but if they do have a blocker, they also know how to pivot to the next priority down.
Yeah, I
And
love that. That's some really great just general project management, or product development strategies.
yeah, and we have those 3 days a week touch points where a service line could say, you know what, my number one isn't my number one anymore. This is, and we'll pivot.
Mhm.
So we
Yeah.
try to. Business is very demanding, and it demands agility, and so we try to structure our team to deliver that agility.
Mm. I love that framework actually. Just for an internal analytics team. Like you're obviously more sort of like an external provider in a lot of cases, from what I can understand. But say you were within your analytics center of excellence within any organization, like a manufacturing or a consumer goods company, having that sort of framework where you go out to your business units and you say, okay, well, what are your priorities? Can you list them? 1, 2, 3. Taking all of those lists of priorities, then dividing all of those priorities to the resources to actually make those projects happen. I think that methodology is fantastic. I think that there is huge value around in organizing in that sort of way. So I really like that. I really appreciate your insights there. That's why I think that's why I like to dive into some of these aspects of actually, it's not always just about the technology, right? It's about like the process. Like to me, that is totally, really optimizing the process of actually delivering on these particular initiatives and these particular projects that you can create immense value from, in the analytics area.
Yeah, and that word process is one I find myself saying quite a bit, because the business usually has a process. It's oftentimes not documented. And BI is coming in trying to solve a problem for the business, but they haven't really laid out what the current state is. So we come in as consultants, effectively saying, map out your business process for us. We're going to figure out where technology can amplify your outputs or optimize how it's run, and you guys should be more successful at the end of the day. I try to hire people that have that process thinking. That
Right.
They don't have to be engineers, but I want them to be able to think in terms of process.
Nice. I like it. Well, our conversation is flowing by, so I want to get onto sort of our final thoughts, because we're really I've been super engaged into all of the ideas and tips that you've been working through. So, is there any sort of final thoughts, like final thoughts on trends that you're seeing in analytics, or final thoughts on just generally how to go about working in this space? I mean, I think it's a very open question, but I think that there might be some unique insights that you have that we maybe have not touched on. So want to just open up for that.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of interest in machine learning. That's been an increased interest. Unfortunately, I haven't seen a lot of great examples of it, at least in my domain, in commercial real estate. So there's a hunger for it, but there's not like a clear deliverable there. We've tried that approach on many tools, like the energy benchmarking project I mentioned earlier. We tried machine learning to find driving vectors, driving values of what would influence energy consumption in a building with all the data we have. And the problem is we just didn't find a great correlation, and part of it came down to the quality of your data, missing data that's not governed, data that has false positives or inaccuracies. And so, machine learning struggles in those domains. I'd love to see it, a more practical application that I could apply to my business. But I think it's probably still a few more years down the road. Other trends I see, like people that just were never exposed to the analytics department are starting to get that exposure. Clients are touching our Tableau dashboards more and more, um, and they're starting to engage with them, which is great. They're asking questions that they didn't think to ask before. Now that they have the data in front of them, and it's really great to see their thinking evolving when they're exposed to this. I think that's going to continue. I think business intelligence and Tableau and dashboarding is going to get further and further into an organization, and climb the hierarchy of our organizations. Especially industries, commercial real estate is not a technical industry. It is a relationship industry. It's a handshake, who you know type of business. It's been like that for many years. And so, for dashboarding to get a seat at the, in the boardroom, like that's a trend I see increasing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree with that. I mean, it's just more and more, it's becoming less about intuition, and it's becoming more about real, your actuals, like actual data, is determining more decisions all the time. And I still feel there's a long way to go. And I get the sense that you think the same way. Is
Absolutely.
that there's still so many more decisions. Like I even just think back to before I set up my own business, and how little. Then this was like sort of 4 years ago. How little was actually how little decisions were made based on actual looking at the real data, real visualization, or a real story of what is actually going on. It was still too much like, this probably sounds about right. This sticks within our policy. It just some of it just didn't make sense. And I think more and more, you're with the democratization is the buzzword. Democratization of data and insights. You're going to just see that happen. That happen significantly more, for sure.
Yeah, and it's good. It's a long time coming.
Yeah, exactly. I think also the accessibility, like and the price is a big one as well. Like it just doesn't cost as much to actually get these insights in front of people, especially with the cloud. You can get good insights anywhere you are on any device. Like that's making a huge difference, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I would envision a time like I long for a time where my client is logging in and they're looking at a Tableau dashboard when they first wake up in the morning with their cup of coffee. Yeah. And like they're getting a lot of the base questions answered for the day.
It's interesting. My background is in finance, and whenever you go to like you go to like a banking institution, or like a financial institution, or a trading organization, you always see these teams with multiple screens, and they've got charts and visualizations, and almost like the pulse of the market. They're always getting the pulse of the market, right? Like they're always getting up-to-date information. And I can kind of see that sort of control center being at the heart of like most people's roles, right? Like most people should have dashboards and real-time information around all aspects of what they're doing, whether you're in marketing, or you're in sales, or customer service, or finance, like even in real estate, right? Like why couldn't you be analyzing energy consumption on an almost like real-time basis? Like, or I think that is going to, I feel like that is how things will evolve over time, for everyone. Like that's sort of my big bet on where this is all going.
Oh, I believe that. I mean, we all sit in front of an air traffic control station, right, in our roles. Like we have things we have to manage. We just don't have the air traffic control station. So I think that's where business intelligence can build that for each employee, or at least the managers of those teams. Yeah.
Like it. Okay, well, I think that's a good one to end on. A good trend, and a good idea to finish up our conversation. So Matt, really appreciate your time. A lot of really unique ideas and insights during our conversation. So yeah, really appreciate it, and want to thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Sam.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for tuning in to the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and to leave us feedback on your favorite listening app. Okay, everyone, take care.